Welcome back to Touring the AFC South. I am your host, Mike Patton. And of course, by now, you've probably heard about the Deshaun Watson ruling. Deshaun Watson will be suspended 6 games going into the 2022 season. And by now, you've probably heard my thoughts on it at the beginning of the show. But of course, I have to get the down deep and dirty information from someone that actually covers one of these teams that are involved in this. That team would be the Houston Texans. Now, coming on the show this time to talk about the Houston Texans and maybe their side of the coin on this one is someone that is a veteran reporter that has basically been there through a lot of different things with the Houston Texans, and I'm so honored to have on Miss Kim Y. Davis. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you? I've cooled off from training camp this morning because it is hot here, but I'm good. Thank you.
I hear you there. Well, I'm doing fine. I'm hanging in there, I will say. I'll probably be a little hotter in a few days in the desert, but we'll talk
Oh,
about that
yeah.
another time. But I wanted to, definitely talk to you about the Houston Texans side of the Deshaun Watson ruling. Of course, again, he suspended 6 games to start the 2022 season. And I wanted to dispel a couple different things that I've heard so many different times, yet I keep trying to tell people it's not true. But maybe they'll believe me if they hear it from you, since you cover the team, you have tons of experience covering the team. So maybe they'll believe it more from you. The team set up Deshaun Watson is one thing that I've heard a lot. I mean, what do you think on those talks?
So I don't think that's the case. And here's why. It didn't benefit the team, right? It just didn't benefit the team. Now, I've always answered the question this way with a part B. Do I think that if Deshaun had not demanded to be released or traded, he was still in the family, so to speak? Um, it may have been different. Perhaps it wouldn't have blown up as big as it did. I think that could be the case, but not because I think the team set him up. I just don't think it was to their advantage to do that. And so, no, I don't think the team set him up.
All right. And the second one, that a lot of people think that he was suspended last year, so that counts as time served.
So he was not suspended last year. Deshaun did not want to play. Both sides agreed that he would not play. He was paid his full salary last season, and so no, Deshaun Watson was not suspended. A suspension would have meant they would have, for instance, with this suspension with the Browns, the first 3 games he can't even practice with the team, and then the second 3 games, I mean, he can practice even though he's still suspended and cannot play. Deshaun was around last year. Initially, they had him out in the field doing ridiculous stuff, scout team. That was kind of stupid on the Texans' part. But he was not suspended. And those games last year, how can they count? Because he still was compensated fully for last season. So those games don't count toward any suspension because that was not a suspension.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for clearing that up. Now, now I've got to get your thoughts on the ruling. Now, before the ruling, what did you think was going to happen before the ruling with any type of suspension with him?
So really, I thought the 6 games was the number. When the NFL intentionally leaked, because that's what they did about a month ago, that they were pushing for a suspension of at least an indefinite suspension with him being out for at least a year and then having to apply for reinstatement. I thought that was them getting ahead of whatever would come out and trying to avoid any sort of a PR backlash based on how things were ruled. So the arbitrator said some interesting things, right? She said, listen, she admonished the league because they didn't have any precedent set for nonviolent sexual assault, sexual misconduct cases, and that basically you're ruling on something kind of in the rear instead of it being based on any sort of precedent or predetermined standards, if you will. So she admonished the league for that. She talked about the fact that Deshaun Watson had been a really upstanding citizen in the league. He had been considered a community, a a good community steward, and that it's his first time having any problems. Now, one might say, but there's a lot of problems, but it is still the first time. She did say she did refer to this case as being egregious. And I think what she said in the statement was that it's the most egregious thing of this nature that she's seen. But I just, to answer your question, I didn't see how it could be really more than 6 games based on the fact that there's no criminal indictment. He was no billed, not exonerated, not the same thing, but he was no billed. And it basically comes down to a he said, she said sort of thing when there's no hard evidence. People go back to, well, look what happened to Ray Rice. It's because there was video, right? We can talk about the cases where there's been video and the ruling has been different. Tyreek Hill, there was no video of things that were alleged by I don't know if it was his wife or the mother of his child, but those things were, some would say, egregious if those things were true. So I think that this independent arbitrator ruled based on really kind of guidelines that were set forth because both sides, meaning the National Football League Players Association and the National Football League, jointly selected and compensated this arbitrator and put this person in place, selected this person to make this ruling. Now, here's the thing, Mike. The NFL has 3 days to decide whether or not they are going to appeal the decision. The NFLPA has already said they're not going to, and we'll have to wait and see what the league does. I don't think they will, but we will see.
Yeah, we'll definitely see. Now, of course, you did mention, of course, kind of the before and the after. So you definitely answered the second question. But, as far as the Texans aren't necessarily out of the woods themselves in this one either. Of course, they did settle with any ones that were the alleged victims as well. But the league is definitely going to take a look at what's going on with them. Do you have any thoughts on what potential punishment could be from the league with the Texans?
I don't know. I believe that all sides want to move forward from this as quickly as possible, including the National Football League. And so the longer they talk about anything with the Texans, I think it prolongs the conversation, which has already been going on for about 18 months or so. And so I'm sure the league is ready to move forward. But, you asked me something earlier about what are the Texans, I don't know if you asked this, but what the Texans think about today's decision. And I was sitting there after practice saying, there's going to be one person that asked Coach Smith about Deshaun. Like, I thought it was not a question for him because Deshaun's not on his team. Last year when he was defensive coordinator, he never coached Deshaun. So this is what he said. The question from a person who came there only for this reason was, is it a relief to not have to deal with this at camp and start fresh? And so Lovie said, well, what happened again? I mean, because remember, he's coming off of being on his field at training camp. He said, another player for somebody else's team? He said, well, I ain't paid a whole lot of, I guess he was going to say, attention. As you can see, 91 guys here kind of occupying my time. I know the rest of the league is kind of moving on, and whatever is happening, well, they're good for. So basically, it's nothing for the Texans to comment on, right, about this decision, and nor should they. I mean, Lovie Smith shouldn't have any kind of comment about Deshaun Watson. He was never really around, and he was never his head coach. He was never even a part of the team since Lovie Smith has been a part of the Houston Texans staff, even as defensive coordinator. So, they are taking the position of moving forward. Now, behind the scenes, there's probably some that think, well, if Deshaun Watson's out, that may make the Browns' record not as great, which makes that draft pick higher for them, in terms of those sorts of things. But, I think that they're ready to move on from it. And listen, this year they don't have to answer those questions like they did last year, right? Week in, week out. That is now for the Cleveland Browns front office and coaching staff and players to have to deal with day in, day out.
Gotcha. Now you did mention how Lovie Smith is handling everything and and all those different things as well. But of course, there's still players that played with him that are actually on that team. So, I know some ways they're feeling a relief of not having to at least deal with it in some aspect, perhaps. So what did you say? What would you say is the next move forward for the Texans in terms of just their team, their organization, and all those different things?
So I think they've done that. I mean, I think the Texans did that when they tried to do it. It was difficult to do it last year because it was unsettled. I think in the offseason when the deal was done and Deshaun was traded to the Browns and Nick Caserio addressed local reporters, I think that was really the end. And so there's really, to me, Mike, no real reason for it to be a Texans issue at this point. Like this, there's nothing for them to weigh in on. I mean, they had to weigh in on it all last season because he was technically still a Houston Texan. He was on their roster. He took up an active roster spot for those who say he was suspended, right? He took up an active roster spot last year, and now he doesn't. So they are moving forward with, like you said, we got 91 guys at camp. What do we look like in terms of our final roster? And going about the 2022 season and trying to obviously improve from what they looked like on the field last season.
Gotcha. Well, I definitely thank you for the insight that you brought in terms of the Houston Texans and kind of their outlook on everything going on. And if you can, tell everyone where they can find you on social media and what all things you got working on.
So you can find me on social media, Kim Y. Davis on Twitter. And I have a show called Chalk Talk. It's live on Tuesdays at 11 a.m. It's on all my platforms on YouTube and Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter. And you can follow me as Kim Y. Davis Media on Instagram, Kim Y. Davis Media on Facebook, and Kim Davis on LinkedIn. I want to ask you, because I wasn't on the top of the show, what was your take on what happened? I'm just curious.
Well, I've got a lot of different ways I'm going here, but the take I look at is just looking at the aspect of the way people are viewing it and kind of pitting a lot of different stories versus the other story and this versus the other story, and kind of using the people as pawns in the entire story instead of understanding that there's real issues and things going on in there. And this is a issue in itself as opposed to an issue versus another issue. And that's kind of like just basically minimizing what actually happened in this entire situation. Now, of course, I believe that Deshaun Watson still has to address in the tone some of these things, but that's on him. That's not on anyone else to continue to try to tell him that. But, that's just what I feel about it. And as the father of a little girl, that definitely, this case rings a little bit harder for me because I see my 8 to soon to be 9-year-old little girl. And what if she was involved in something like this? A lot of people don't want to think about those different things, but if you put yourself in those situations, I can guarantee you the thinking would be a lot different than what you currently are thinking.
So I will say this before we go. I mean, obviously I'm a woman, and I've worked in an all-male environment my entire, adult life. And so obviously, I think women should be protected and not, treated unfairly and any of those things. But if I look at it, and it's difficult, we all bring some of ourselves to everything that we do, and look at it from as fair and as objective position as I possibly can, then that's why I arrive at kind of the position that I have. I don't know what happened in those rooms. And the people who got a chance to hear much more of the evidence, if you will, than any of us did, have come to some certain conclusions. And so that's really, to me, all you have to go on. And that's kind of where I sit. But yeah, it's crazy. And, and I wonder too, Mike, people say, well, he hasn't atoned for it. If your position is, I didn't do anything wrong, so what are you atoning for, right? I don't really know how you do both. If you really believe that you didn't do anything wrong, now how his team handles it moving forward, now that once it's kind of totally settled with the league, maybe there's a different position he can take. But going through it, if you're maintaining that you didn't do anything wrong, if that's what you believe, I don't know how you atone during this time. But we'll see.
Totally understandable. Always great to chat with you, Miss Kim Y. Davis.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And you've been tuned in to Touring the AFC South. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back with our next segment. We're going to go to the Cleveland side of the Deshaun Watson ruling.